It's Patrik Hutzel from intensivecarehotline.com, where we instantly improve the lives for families of critically ill patients in intensive care so that you can make informed decisions, have peace of mind, real power, real control, and so that you can influence decision making fast, even if you're not a doctor or a nurse in intensive care. In the last blog, I shared a quick tip for families in ICU when to attend family meetings in intensive care and how to prepare. You can check out the last blog by clicking on the link below this video. In this week's blog, I want to talk about a current issue. The blog today is Murder by Opioid, the case of the Ohio doctor charged with 25 counts of murder in intensive care. So in today's blog, I want to give a word of warning for families in intensive care. Your and other families' biggest challenge is simply that you don't know what you don't know when your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. It's like stepping into the matrix. What you see is actually not what you get. There is a very different world behind the curtains on the other side, and I can help you to get that key to that matrix. It is the elusive obvious. First off, I do want to acknowledge that there are a lot of good things happening in intensive care or ICU. Many lives are being saved and many critical illnesses are cured to the point where patients can leave intensive care, go to a hospital ward, and continue their path to recovery. As a matter of fact, more than 90% of critically ill patients in intensive care do survive, and that is fantastic news. Most professionals in intensive care, doctors, nurses, as well as allied health professionals are doing overwhelmingly amazing work, and it needs to be acknowledged on all levels. By the same token, whenever patients in intensive care are either in a real or perceived end-of-life situation, the situation is often getting out of control for families in intensive care. And if families in intensive care don't do their own research and if they don't exercise their rights, the outcomes can be futile. If you are wondering what's the difference between real and perceived end-of-life situations, you may want to check out another article and video that I wrote a while ago, which is the difference between real and perceived end-of-life situations when your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. Going back to our topic today. It's really important to know that families in intensive care actually do have rights, even though ICU teams want to make you believe that they are the ones holding the power and that they can make decisions in a vacuum. Nothing could be further from the truth, as the story that is to follow below will show you. I am so frustrated when families come to us, when families in intensive care come to us and tell us things like, tomorrow at 5 p.m. the intensive care team wants to stop life support on my loved one. They have told us that there is nothing else we can do. That's a whole lot of crap. And you have rights and you just need to be shown your rights and you need to exercise them. That's often all it takes to take matters in your own hands. We can help you with all of what I mentioned before because we understand intensive care inside out as professional consultants and advocates for families in intensive care. After I've worked in intensive care for 20 years in 3 different countries, where I looked after thousands of critically ill patients and their families, and where I also worked as a nurse unit manager in intensive care for over 5 years, I have seen enough to know and understand intensive care inside out. I know and understand how ICUs operate, what's important to ICUs, and I also understand intimately what's important to you who has a loved one critically ill in intensive care. And I know how to get results for families in intensive care after having consulted and advocated for hundreds of families in intensive care all over the world here in my own consultancy and advocacy at intensivecarehotline.com. The story that's about to follow just confirms what I always say, that patients in intensive care are often being euthanized or potentially being murdered. The story of the intensive care physician Dr. Hutzel below. Dr. Hutzel has been charged with the count of 25 murders of ICU patients, confirms that families in intensive care often consent to, or at least involuntarily watch the potential murder of their loved ones without actually knowing what is happening. Again, the biggest challenge for families in intensive care is that they don't know what they don't know. There are very fine lines and many grey areas in intensive care when it comes to end-of-life situations. The lines are often blurred when it comes to palliative care, euthanasia, and potentially murder. Nobody, and I say nobody, has the right to kill, and life-sustaining measures cannot be removed without family consent in most countries. Just because a critically ill patient in intensive care may be dying if they are removed from life-sustaining measures doesn't mean that they wouldn't recover if more time and more appropriate treatment is being allowed and given. The biggest challenge and also worst case scenario for intensive care teams, on the other hand, is to look after a patient in intensive care indefinitely with an uncertain outcome. That's when it often gets tricky and challenging in intensive care when the odds may not be in a patient's favor. Furthermore, the longer an ICU bed is occupied by a critically ill patient, the more hospital and ICU administration are looking at the dollars or at the pounds, whichever country you're in, as well as how many other potentially more beneficial / profitable patients could be looked after in that ICU bed. Again, intensive care teams don't operate in a vacuum, and they often, they have to follow rules, regulations, policies, and laws. It's interesting for me to read that the ICU physician Dr. Hutzel has administered large quantities and therefore lethal doses of fentanyl to hasten death. He administered those high and therefore lethal doses of fentanyl even for patients that were deemed brain dead. It's shocking, and one of the reasons why he might have gotten away for so long with this criminal behavior is that families in intensive care are intimidated and they don't question. They are intimidated by intensive care teams, and again, families in intensive care simply don't know what they don't know and they don't question. Even in the now 21st century, families of critically ill patients in intensive care, quote unquote, suck up to the doctors and to intensive care teams. This behavior needs to stop because it costs lives. The bottom line is that if you have a loved one critically ill in intensive care and you don't act, if you don't ask questions, if you don't do your own research, your critically ill loved one may have less than desired outcomes, potentially lethal outcomes. You need to act now before it's too late. You need to do your own research here at our website, intensivecarehotline.com. Read our case studies, call us, email us, and make informed decisions. Get peace of mind, control, power, and influence in the process. Lastly, I'm also surprised that the ICU nurses involved in the patient's deaths didn't question the administration of such high doses of fentanyl. Were they afraid to lose their jobs if they didn't follow the doctor's orders? Administering more than 500 micrograms of fentanyl as a bolus can be lethal. Every ICU nurse should be aware of this fact and question before following orders blindly. So I will now read out the story below of Dr. Hutzel, the ICU physician in Ohio, who has been charged for the count of 25 murders by fentanyl overdose patients in ICU. And if you are watching this on YouTube, just click on the link below this video. That'll get you to our website where you can read Dr. Hutzel's story. But as I said, I will read out the article now. So on June 5th, Dr. William Scott Hutzel, 43, was indicted by a grand jury on 25 counts of murder, making him the target of one of the largest murder trials in the state's history. Hutzel is accused of ordering opioid doses in such large amounts that the only rational purpose could be to shorten a person's life, according to prosecutors. The charges followed a 6-month investigation initiated by Mount Carmel Health System, where Hutzel worked as an intensive care physician, after a pharmacist alerted hospital staff about high doses of fentanyl ordered by Dr. Hutzel. The hospital concluded that the medications resulted in the deaths of at least 25 patients. Has the widely publicized case against Hutzel caused Ohio medical professionals to look over their shoulders, worried that their own opioid prescribing might draw new levels of scrutiny? So, the incidents involving Hutzel took place over a span of 4 years at Mount Carmel St. Anne's Hospital and the now shuttered Mount Carmel West Hospital. An acute care physician with a certification in anesthesiology, Hutzel ordered excessive and potentially fatal doses of fentanyl for inpatients who were already near death, according to the hospital. Hutzel was originally investigated in connection with 35 patients' deaths. Ultimately, he was charged with murder in 25 patient deaths as a result of a decision by prosecutors to only charge instances in which patients were given a dose 5 to 10 times higher than that usually required to control severe pain. Some patients were ordered doses of 1,000 to 2,000 micrograms. The family of one patient alleges that Hutzel encouraged them to agree to removal of life-sustaining care and then ordered that a dose of 2,000 micrograms of fentanyl be given. The patient died within 5 minutes of receiving that dose. Staff at the facility were placed under a microscope as the administration and law enforcement tried to determine how this happened and whether current prescribing practices were abused, broken, or simply ignored. The Ohio Board of Nursing alleged that 25 nurses at Mount Carmel violated the Nurse Practice Act by failing to question excessive fentanyl doses. Altogether, 23 nurses, pharmacists, and managers who had been involved at some level with administering these doses to the affected patients were fired. 11 others were allowed to return to work with additional training. Mount Carmel Health System President and CEO Ed Lamb also resigned. No other healthcare professionals at the hospital were charged with murder. In our view, the doctor who issued the order is the person that caused the chain of events to occur, and therefore that responsible person would be who we'd look at in terms of criminal investigation. Franklin County Prosecutor Ron O'Brien said. However, many were named in civil wrongful death suits. Unlike murder charges in criminal courts, which must be brought by the state, wrongful death suits are filed in civil courts by families on behalf of the deceased. Some families claimed that Hutzel informed them that their family member was brain dead and the doses were necessary to ensure comfort at the end of life. Several of the suits involved patients who died within hours, sometimes minutes, of each other. At least one death occurred after the hospital had received a formal complaint concerning Hutzel. The health system says in all cases, family members had decided to withdraw life-saving measures. Both Hutzel and his attorney declined requests for an interview. But in statements to the press, they asserted that at no time did Hutzel ever intend to euthanize anyone. Whether or not those doses can be justified will probably be the subject of dueling testimony by medical experts at trial. None of the physicians with whom Medscape spoke defended Hutzel. The Ohio Board of Pharmacy and Ohio Board of Nursing also declined to comment for this story. Tessie Pollock, Director of Communications for the State Medical Board, said Ohio law prohibits the board from discussing how many or which employees were reviewed, the results of any reviews, or whether those reviews are still ongoing. In August 2019, Hutzel sued the hospital's parent company for breach of contract, asserting that although the hospital has defended him in the 36 civil proceedings arising from the allegations, it and its insurance carrier have refused to cover the cost of his criminal trial, thus limiting his ability to mount a defense. To date, Mount Carmel has paid $13 million to settle wrongful deaths death suits filed by the families of the patients who died. The hospital counters that Hutzel is not covered by the institution's malpractice policy because he was charged with purposeful murder. Hutzel was accompanied by a new defense team during his last court appearance. A trial date is set for June 2020 and is anticipated to last several months. So, how can you become the best advocate for your critically ill loved one? How can you make informed decisions, get peace of mind, control, power, and influence quickly whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care? You will get to that all-important feeling of making informed decisions, get peace of mind, control, power, and influence when you download your free instant impact report now by entering your email below. In your free instant impact report, you will learn quickly how to make informed decisions, get peace of mind, real power, and real control, and how you can influence decision-making fast whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. Your free instant impact report gives you in-depth insight that you must know whilst your loved one is critically ill or is even dying in intensive care. Sign up and download your free instant impact report now by entering your email below. In your free instant impact report, you will learn how to speak the secret intensive care language so that the doctors and the nurses know straight away that you are an insider and that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care. In your free report, you will also discover how to ask the doctors and the nurses the right questions, discover the many competing interests in intensive care and how your critically ill loved one's treatment may depend on those competing interests, how to eliminate fear, frustration, stress, struggle, and vulnerability even if your loved one is dying. You will get 5 mind-blowing tips and strategies helping you to get on the right path to making informed decisions, get peace of mind, control, power, and influence in your situation. You will get real-world examples that you can easily adapt to your and your critically ill loved one's situation. How to stop being intimidated by the intensive care team and how you will be seen as equals. You will get crucial behind-the-scenes insight so that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care and how you need to manage doctors and nurses in intensive care, and it's not what you think. Thank you for tuning into this week's blog, and I'll see you again next week in another update. Make sure you also have a look at our Your Questions Answered section where I answer your questions, or simply send me an email to support@intensivecarehotline.com with your questions. You can also call me, find phone numbers on the top of the website. Also have a look at our membership site intensivecaresupport.org for families of critically ill patients in intensive care. You also check out our ebook section where you get more ebooks, videos and audio recordings, and where you can also get one-on-one consulting with me via Skype, over the phone and via email by clicking on the email and phone counseling tabs on the top of the website. This is Patrik Hutzel from intensivecarehotline.com, and I'll see you again next week in another update.